This series of author interviews is brought to you by Leisure Press and the Book Reality Experience, turning writers' dreams into book realities.
Hi everybody, and welcome to the latest in our author interviews of book reality authors. And today we're joined by M Knox, or rather less formally, Vicky. Hello Vicky, how are you?
Hi Ian.
So how's life, and where are you speaking to us from?
I live in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales, and that's an area around Bowral.
Excellent stuff. And were you born and bred there, or what's the story about Vicky Knox?
I was born in Sydney and grew up there. I went to two different independent schools, Ravenswood and Abbotsleigh, and I loved Abbotsleigh. I better not say that, had I? You better cut that bit out. But yeah, I did love Abbotsleigh. And then when I left there, I did the thing that my mother wanted me to do. I went kindergarten teaching. And a year into that, I thought, I don't think I want to do this, which is a nice way of saying I didn't want to blow noses and white bottoms. So then I didn't know what I was going to do. So I went overseas for a while and just went around and went to England and Europe and whatnot. When I got back, my mother said, well, I don't care what you do as long as you don't go nursing. And I have to say, it had never occurred to me to go nursing. And of course, being the contrary beast that I am, I went, nursing? Never even considered it. So that's what I did. And to everyone's great astonishment, I actually got through it because it was pretty tough in those days, hospital-based. And yeah, got there. And then I got involved in occupational health and safety, and I went to Melbourne to stay with an old pal. And because I'd been a singer at school, her husband was involved with the Australian Opera and singing teaching. He said, what on earth are you doing this? You should be singing. And so that started a somewhat late career getting into the opera. Then you get too old, so the wrinkles come, and that started the writing.
Well done. So when you say that you were into opera, you were a soprano, or what?
Yes. What they call a spinto soprano, which is sort of the big stuff, you know, the Madame Butterflies. And I wasn't always a spinto. I was sort of more lyric coloratura as a young person. But as you get older, your voice develops. And so I was able to do some of the more bigger roles. Yeah.
Excellent. Well done. And then you said that you got into writing. So had writing been a continuous passion throughout this in the background, or was writing something that you came to?
Not at all. Never even thought about it. Funnily enough, I do remember at school winning essay competitions, and I wrote a children's book when I was, and I've still got the handwritten manuscript of that. One day I might give it to you. And just put it away, never took it seriously. And then I was working at my husband's business, and he wanted a procedure manual. Now, interestingly, procedure manuals are, generally speaking, the most boring, inane things that people want, and then when they get them, never want to read them. So I decided to make it funny. And I thought, well, I'll read it if it's funny. And I really enjoyed the writing process. And that started me writing.
Now, to go from a procedural manual to your first novel, which is actually a World War II based murder, mystery, crime, thriller, espionage laden, with a central character who is a Church of England vicar, that's a leap. So how do you go from the procedural manual to the first of what became the Clement Wisdom novels?
So actually the first book I ever wrote has never been published, neither the second book. They were both set in the post-Napoleonic period. It was a female main character. She was a guerrilla fighter. And I really enjoyed writing those books, and went to Spain, of course, any excuse to go, and really enjoyed that. But they were my nursery, because I didn't go off and do creative writing courses. I just started writing. And so I made every mistake that a writer can make. but they were my nursery school. And so when I had finally finished those 2 books and realized that I didn't think they were going to take off, it was then that I heard the inspiration for the Clement Wisdom series. And that was watching a program called QI. And Stephen Fry asked the question, who or what were Churchill's scallywags? And they turned out to be these clandestine cells of guerrilla fighters set up by the British government in anticipation of the Nazi invasion in the English summer of 1940. And what it said was that when I did some research on it, was that only the local senior policeman knew the identity of these men, so secret were these organizations. However, when the Germans landed, that policeman became the cell's first victim. Now, of course, we know with hindsight that the Nazis never did invade, but they certainly had a plan to do so. And therefore, the local senior policeman never did get bumped off. But I thought it would make a great murder mystery story if they had been, and actually they were, called up on the 7th of September, but then stood down quite quickly. And so I decided to bump off the local senior policeman and make it a murder mystery. So when our man goes to do the deed, the local senior policeman's already dead.
And Clement saw the light of day through a system of hybrid publishing that you took your book to a company, which we're not going to name for various legal reasons. But what was your experience of the whole hybrid publishing world initially?
Frightful.
That's a very good summary. Why? What happened? Because I know that there are people out there who may want to be traditionally published but haven't found the niche or get the rejection letters that say, oh, this isn't on trend, etc. It's nothing to do about the quality of the writing. But you decided to go down the hybrid pathway, but you had a bad experience.
Yes. And then I decided, I really don't really want to talk too much about them, but I've developed a theory, and it is a theory, and you may choose to cut this out of this recording, but I actually believe these people charge huge amounts of money. Now, I didn't pay a huge amount. It was a big amount, but not a huge amount. And these days, from what I hear, some people in the UK are paying around £8,000 to get books published. And I find that just staggering, because I have a theory that they actually don't want you to sell well. And my reasoning for this is because these people charge a one-off fee. So if your book does well and they have to do a second or third print run, then that's going to be at their cost. So if they think that they can take on a book and all you're going to do is sell 10 copies to your family, then clearly they've made a lot of money out of you. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I didn't really get much in the way of royalties, and so I was quite disheartened about the whole business. Not long after that, I developed cancer, and so writing and books and everything, and interestingly, I'd actually written the second book by then, but once 2017 came, I just had to focus on staying alive. And so it wasn't until 2019 that the first book, which I then rewrote and retitled, came out, and the second book a month later with you.
So how did you decide to go with us? Where did you find us, or how did you decide to put your foot back into that potentially piranha-laden lake?
Yes, it is I never actually sent the second book, or indeed the third or the fourth, to any traditional publishers. Once I found you, I decided to stay with you. And so, the second, third and fourth books have never been in any slush file anywhere, on any agent's desk. I decided to do that because once I got over cancer, there was no guarantee that it wasn't going to come back. And I just thought, look, traditional publishing takes a very long time. And did I have that long time? Was I better to just stay with what I knew? And so that's what I did. how I got to you, and I will tell you, I don't know whether this, again, whether you might want to cut this out, but I had been in Tasmania and I'd seen a magazine in a hotel that was advertising a company called
40 South.
40 degrees south
40
or
degrees
something.
south, yeah.
40 degrees south. And so I rang them and they said, well, we only publish Tasmanian books, but we recommend this person. And it was you. And I rang, and as you might recall, the reception on the phone was appalling because you were away at the time. And then I had a bit of a setback with my health. So it was then a few months before I got back to you. If not, I just don't remember how long, but it might have been a considerable period. Yeah.
And it was very good that you did, because we actually ended up, you being from Sydney and me living in Western Australia, and yet we met in London when we were both over there at the same time.
Yes, amazing.
Which was quite nice. So the first book, the Clement Wisdom opener, which is called In Spite of All Terror, centered around these scallywags, of which, for anybody that's into their history, the old politician Sir Tony Benn had been a scallywag. There were numerous establishment figures in the UK that had volunteered for this when they were much younger. From there, we take Clement forward.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
There's a man, I won't say his surname because he's very shy. His first name is Ron. He's now 100 years old. And I have a photograph of him, which unfortunately he won't allow me to put on any website. But I have the photo of him reading my books. And he is possibly the last remaining surviving auxiliar.
Oh, wow.
Yes, quite extraordinary. I got quite a thrill out of that when I received an email from a man who knows him and who's done a lot of research on the auxiliary units. And he got the photograph for me. And there is Ron holding In Spite of All Terror.
Fantastic.
And he's read all of them. And it's great, isn't it? Just love it.
There's something quite special when someone reaches out to praise your work. In fact, I'll ask you that. What's the best feedback you've had with regards to your books? Because I should say that we've got 4 of the Clement Wisdom series out now. We've got In Spite of All Terror, If Necessary Alone, which was set in northern Scotland, Where Death and Danger Go, which is set in Cambridgeshire, or starts in Cambridgeshire, and then West Wind Clear, which interestingly is set around the Singapore Northern Territory of Australia stretch with the Japanese in the Pacific. So what's the best feedback you've had for the series?
I mean, I get some marvellous comments. And I think I posted something recently that I think the person is in the UK, but sorry, it might be America. And they said that the 4 books are some of the best books they've ever read. And I thought that was an extraordinary thing to say. I've got some really devoted readers out there who say lovely things. With the 4th book, and I knew that this 4th book was going to probably appeal to a less number of people because it isn't, I would say, a traditional murder mystery or thriller like the first 2. Funnily enough, the 3rd book is probably my favourite because it's intrigue, and I like the idea of the intrigue. The 4th book is probably for people like me who's a nut about mathematics and cryptology, which I really enjoy, but it's probably too purist for the traditional murder mystery reader. So I probably have to get back a bit more to that for the next one.
I must admit, the West Wind Clear it definitely shifts. It shifts perspective from the European theatre of war to the Pacific theatre of war, but it also features a lot of people who were real life within the war effort within Australia and within the cryptology effort within Australia. So it's almost, it's gone from a murder mystery to more espionage and in-depth. But Clement's still at the heart of it, and I think a lot of people have just warmed to Clement a lot.
Yes.
And we should mention that, speaking of feedback, your second book was nominated for or was given rather, a Publishers Weekly starred review, which is no mean feat. In the world of book reviews, a PW starred review is the equivalent of an Oscar. You must have been quite proud about that.
I didn't realise it, and I didn't even see the star until you highlighted it. so I was quite chuffed about that. But I think probably that's why I need to get back to more murder mystery stuff, because that's, I think, what people want. Interestingly, I have a reasonable readership in the USA, and that surprised me, because the first three stories don't involve America or Americans in any way. And it surprised me how devoted some of the USA readers are, and Canadian readers. But I decided with the fourth one that therefore I should have at least one American, if not, a couple, to acknowledge my American readership. And so the lovely Joe Watkins appears. So I'm rather hopeful that Joe Watkins might appear in the next one.
Very good. Now, when we were talking about your writing, and hopefully you're going to write the next one very quickly, thank you very much. What is your work schedule when you're writing? Do you have to have a set room or a set place? Do you have to have a certain drink? Do you have to have a hat?
I never say no to a gin and tonic in the evening, but I also don't say no to tea. I drink volumes of tea when I'm writing. I do have a study, and I am lucky that way. We bought this house for two reasons: the shed out the back for my husband, which is more than a shed, it could take 7 cars, but also a designated study for me. So it is, you can see behind me all sorts of things on the walls, and my lovely statue of Winston Churchill and all sorts of things. So yes, I'm lucky, I do have a designated study. Sorry, I've forgotten what else you said.
Do you have a routine? I mean, do you get up at 7 and write until 11 and have a break, or is it as and when you can fit it in? Or?
Yeah. When I'm really writing, when I write from scratch, because the books are historically based, I do a lot of research. I'll find what triggers a story is sometimes a really minor historical event. Now, look, the auxiliary units, you couldn't say they were minor. They were a big event. But for the second book, the two historical events that underpin the story is a strafing of a lighthouse on Stromer Island on the 22nd of February 1941. It didn't cause any damage and it didn't hurt anyone. So why did they do it? There's no real answer to that, but that underpins the story for the second book. There is an off-page historical event, which were the raids on the Lofoten Islands on the 4th of March 41, that was highly successful. And there was a boat there that was scuttled, but not before two rather brave British sailors jumped on board this sinking boat called the Krebs and found Enigma rotors and an Enigma code book, which certainly catapulted the solving of the naval Enigma codes for the particularly for the Atlantic, the convoys crossing the Atlantic. That saved a lot of lives there. So that is also, whilst it isn't part of the story, it does underpin the story to some extent. For the third book, where the German spy Joseph Jacobs jumped out of a Heinkel, I knew that he had jumped into a field in Cambridgeshire and broken his leg on landing, and was there overnight in a very cold field until early morning, when he fired a pistol several times to alert some nearby farm workers. But I discovered in researching Joseph Jacobs that he'd actually damaged his foot as he got out of the aeroplane. I understand the opening from a Heinkel is very small, and so he did some considerable damage to his foot as he jumped out. Now, that's a fairly minor thing, but because it's minor, my brain says, was there someone who pushed him? Was there someone else on the plane who pushed him out of the plane? And so that underpins the story for book 3, that minor thing. Yeah.
So on all of that research, what's the most intriguing or interesting fact or thing that stopped you in your tracks?
I'd have to say the double cross system. There's a marvellous book by J.C. Masterton called The Double Cross System. I think it's hard to come by now. I have a copy. I might take that one too, about the double cross system, where they they knew who was coming into the country because there was a double agent, codenamed Snow, who was selling identities to the Abwehr. So as soon as these people came with ration books and money and transmitters and maps and all the rest of it, and as soon as they used that ration book locally, then MI5 would be able to go and pick them up because the names were sold by Snow to the Germans, but provided to MI5, so they knew who was coming. And they were encouraged, we'll say, to become double agents because otherwise it was going to be the hangman's noose. I found that really fascinating. But I do find coding, I'm absolutely enthralled by coding. I really love it. And I loved the fact that with the Japanese codes, because the Japanese codes are character-based, they're syllabic. It's a syllabic language. And so Morse code had to change to become Kana code, which is syllabic based, and the Japanese naval codes were all numeric, whereas the Enigma codes are alpha. So because German is a Romanized alphabet. So of course, all the Enigma stuff deals with the alphabet that we know, but you couldn't use that with the Japanese codes because it doesn't use it. It's a character-based language. It's not a Romanized language. So that was really interesting.
I love the fact that you've got so far into this. I must admit, from my perspective, the cryptology or the cryptology side of life is amazing because I once had the pleasure of going to GCHQ as part of what I used to do for a living.
Yes. I mean, Bletchley Park is a fantastic place. I've been there 4 times now. And there's this funny photograph of me sitting. If you've been there lately, you'll know that they've set up radios that they listened into to pick up, and you can tune the dial to pick up the Morse code being transmitted, and then you write it down. And if you're moderately quick at it, you get a thumbs up. You've done well, girl. And because there's, I think, only 2 or 3 of these things set up, there's a lot of tourists who want to sit there and try their hand. And so when I got up to let a young man behind me sit down, he said to me, "Did you used to do this during the war?"
Yes, thanks very much for that.
I went out and bought new wrinkle cream immediately.
Oh, yeah. It's like, what did you do during the war? I wasn't in the war. Yeah, thanks very much.
I wasn't even born.
Oh, fantastic.
But it did make me worried. I thought, oh dear, new wrinkle cream.
So what's next then? Are you going to do the 5th Clement, or have you got any other projects on the go?
Yes. Oh, look, I will do the 5th Clement because I had actually originally, as I think you know, intended to just make it a trilogy. But I got to the end of book 3, and as we know, he walks away a bit. And I started getting emails from readers saying, come on, we want a 4th. And one even said something like, back to the board, the M Knox, off you go, and don't lift your nose until it's done. So I'm not quite sure. I think probably number 5 will still be in the Pacific. I think there's some nice characters there. I'm very fond of Tom Archer. I think he's a lovely character. And I think Joe Watkins as well. There's a variety of things that I can do if I stay with the espionage thing. Maybe I might do the escape from Corregidor. Maybe that. But we'll see. And look, I've got other ideas, some things that I would like to do. I've always particularly wanted to do one about art fraud. I learned that, as we all know from the Cambridge 5, that's a Charles Cumming book, from the Cambridge 5, that Anthony Blunt was curator of the Courtauld Gallery, and he was the world expert on Poussin paintings. And it occurred to me that I thought, okay, well, that's interesting because we know that art auctions are often used to launder money. So maybe I could sort of use a laundering money to supply a USSR sort of ring that's set up in London or something like that. I haven't done a lot of research on that just yet, but that's always been at the back of my mind that I'd like to do something like that. And I think it's time. I won't kill off Clement. He will certainly live to see throughout the war. and we're only at 1942, so who knows, there might be a few more yet. But I would like to pursue something else.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. And we should say at this point, there was a recent report came out about, and it came out during the merger of Simon & Schuster and Penguin in America, which people are getting quite het up about. But it stated that the average traditionally published book sold less than 50. And in fact, depending on the reading of it, sold less than a dozen copies. And it was a shockwave that went through, and it was on Twitter and it was on various social media reports, but it was outrageous that traditionally published authors on average were selling so few books. And we should say that you've sold thousands as an independently published author. Absolutely
fun,
thousands.
That's fun, isn't it?
It is. And so people shouldn't be scared that independently publishing is not a back alley because you cannot get a traditional deal. Independently publishing is a choice, and with appropriately marketing and appropriate word of mouth, then thousands upon thousands of books are within your grasp. So yes. Congratulations on that, by the way.
Thanks. Look, I do think that the self-publishing was once thought of as the elephant in the room, and I think sadly in Australia that is still probably the way we think. In Britain and certainly in America, that has changed enormously, and so I think gradually self-publishing will become a force to be reckoned with. I think the idea that only Great Aunt Maud will buy your book if you're self-published, or that you are unsuccessful with the traditional publishers, therefore you've turned to self-publishing, is going. I think that's going. I wish the bookshops thought differently, but because they are still quite focused on traditional publishers. In my own area, I, funnily enough, worked it out just today because I was talking to a lady I met in our village about it, and I totted it up that I have sold somewhere between 200 and 300 copies locally. And because the local bookshop won't keep self-published books, that is around about $4,000 to $5,000 worth of book sales that she's missed out on.
It's an intriguing thing, especially when we talk about certain bookshops, like the bookshop in Darwin, which we should give a call out to.
Yes, they're fantastic.
They hosted a book launch for you. You travelled up there. There were tens, 20, 30, 40, 50 people turned up, and they kept turning up and they kept buying your book. And so where you might think you might get half a dozen people, you had 4 dozen people in a bookshop there to listen to you about your books and to buy your books. So everything's possible if they can just change their mindset, like certain bookshops, like the one in Darwin, did.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Right. Well, thank you ever so much for your time today. What we're going to do, if you're willing, is end up with a series of little quickfire questions.
Okay.
If you'd like to. Okay. So, author M Knox, author of the Clement Wisdom series. What is your favourite book?
I think I have 2. One is The History of SOE by M.R.D. Foote, and the other one, I'll just have to get it, is this one.
Oh, right. Very good. The one that we were just talking about.
Yeah, this one is The Double Cross System by J.C. Masterman.
Fantastic.
And as you can see, it's only a little book, but it was absolutely fascinating about how they got these misinformation across to the Nazis, and how successful it was. And I can just say that there was one who was never discovered by the Abwehr. His real name was Wolf Schmidt. His code name was Tate, and he requested £20,000. In 1941, £20,000 was an astronomical figure. And interestingly, a Japanese diplomat carried it from Germany into England in 1941. Well, 1940. Yeah.
Very good.
Amazing.
Right, now, if you've got one, and I will forgive you if you go you don't have one at all, but what is your least favourite book?
I'm not good on chick lit.
Okay.
I won't say which one, but as a genre, I can't cope with school reunions of all these women coming together to gossip. It's unimportant.
Okay. Creatively, I'll try and say that word again. Creatively, what turns you on?
History and
Okay.
good music.
History and music, excellent. And conversely, and this can be in any realm, what turns you off?
Large gatherings of sort of social women's activities, where women who've got brains get relegated to making, for example, gingerbread houses or knitting. Look, nothing against that, if that's your thing. But if it isn't your thing, being forced into, because you happen to be female, into doing such pursuits is mind-numbingly boring. Give me cryptology any day.
Fantastic. Season-wise, summer or winter?
For writing?
No, for anything, just in general.
Oh, summer. Oh, summer. More heat, the better.
On a completely free day to do anything you want, who do you spend it with?
My daughters and my grandchildren.
Mountains or oceans?
That's a hard one, because until recently it's been mountains. But now that I've lived in the mountains, well, in the countryside, I'm really craving the sea.
And what is your favourite movie?
Classic, Lawrence of Arabia. Modern, Top Gun Maverick.
Oh, very good. What song, if you've only got, now this is going to be difficult for you, I know, with your music background, but if you've only got one song to listen to for the rest of your life, what would it be?
The love duet at the end of Act 1 in Madame Butterfly, with Victoria de Los Angeles and Jussi Björling singing.
Wow. Who makes you laugh the most?
My daughter Elizabeth.
And what smell do you love?
Jasmine, I think. Jasmine flowers.
And what smell do you hate?
There's a few, isn't there? You know, sort of anything to do with sort of food poisoning comes to mind.
Okay.
Both ways.
Moving swiftly on. Other than the professions that you have done, what would you like to attempt?
I would like to do art history. I would very much like to study the hidden messages behind art. I think that's fascinating.
And what profession would you not like to do?
I have a daughter who's a lawyer, and I know how hard she works. And whilst I did at times think I would like to do law, I think that is the least. I wouldn't want to do what she does.
Okay. And lastly, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you finally arrive at the pearly gates?
Well done, good and faithful servant.
Oh, nice work. Victoria, thank you ever so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I hope to look forward to the Clement Wisdom 5 or whatever other book you decide to write in the coming months. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you for inviting me on.
No worries. Take care.
Hi, thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more readings and author interviews. And don't forget to hit that bell to get notified every time we post new content.